I am your host, Sir John. I run a radio program on WESU. It's called Pint of Comics, and you can hear guests like Paul Kupperberg here every Sunday night at 6:30. But you're not here for me, you're here for Paul, which is pretty cool. Paul's got a lot to talk about today.
Paul can find a few things, sure.
Starting off with, let's start off with Peacemaker, since that's where the program booklet says we should.
Yes, well.
Because it goes from Peacemaker to Doom Patrol.
That's right. Well, Peacemaker, it kind of, when I was growing up, there was, no superheroes on TV or in the movies. You had Batman, a few bad shows there and there. And even though they really are digging deep and bringing up characters you never would have expected to get, on the air, let alone that big a budget, they found Peacemaker, which originally was a character created for Charlton Comics in the 60s by Joe Gill and Pat Boyette. And it was kind of, he was just a very blah, high-tech, anti-terrorist kind of guy, which meant something entirely different in the 1960s than it does now.
Absolutely.
But, he lasted for about a year, and the whole Charlton superhero line went away. And the next time he showed up was at DC Comics after they bought all the Charlton characters from that company. And in the 80s, they were really trying hard to develop the characters into something. There was an attempt to do a weekly comic, either called Comic Cavalcade or Blockbuster or one or the other. And it was going to be all the Charlton characters in weekly strips, 4 to 6 page stories that would continue, and Superman, because
Why not?
They had to anchor it with something that they knew might sell. But anyway, that book never happened, and I had done I did a whole serial Captain Atom, this whole 12-part thing, and Keith Giffen had worked on Peacemaker.
And none of that has seen print?
None of that had seen print, no. And then I forget how exactly it came about. I needed somebody crazy for Vigilante. And I don't know how I fell upon Peacemaker, but, he was around, he was available, and what Keith had set up, that he heard voices, the voices of his victims speaking to him through the helmet, I figured that, would make a great nut job, a great nut job killer, because that's what you want in a book like Vigilante. It's about a nut job killer going after other nut job killers, so used him for 3 issues. He murdered a few people and then moved on, as we are wont to do, and something about it seemed to resonate enough that they slated the figure for the character for a 4-issue miniseries, and I wrote that too. And I accelerated the crazy, and I just put him full blown insane. This is back in 1985 or 6 or so. So we could still use Nazis in World War II. World War II is aged out.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Nazis are okay now. But, what do I know?
And you can't put a swastika on anything.
You can't put a swastika because, you might offend somebody. Like the people who wear swastikas. Yeah. Anyway, who am I to judge? Oh, wait, a Jew. So anyway, I just amplified the crazy, and now it was his dead SS father who had committed suicide in front of the young Peacemaker's eyes, when he was 5 or 6 years old. So, I figured that just left me room to go nuts. And James Gunn was looking for 2 things in characters for the Suicide Squad movie: obscurity and nuts. Right? Polka Dot Man?
Well, yeah. I mean,
the Weasel. Was it the Weasel?
The Weasel, which didn't you kill the Weasel?
I might have.
I thought in the
Doom Patrol special?
Yeah, the special there. Yeah.
I could have, yeah.
Or maybe he survived. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've read that.
And I've killed so many characters.
Yeah, you are known for that.
Yes, I am. Yeah. I am a comic book serial killer. So he picked up on that. He picked up on the vigilante issues, the miniseries, as well as John Ostrander's Suicide Squad itself, which was, of course, the main inspiration. But the crazy came from the Peacemaker side of things. That kind of attitude. So all of a sudden he's back, but you'll notice DC has not reprinted the miniseries.
No, they have not.
And well, I know why. I think.
Oh yeah.
Did you read it? Have you ever read that thing?
Oh yeah.
Have you read it recently?
No, not recently.
Okay.
I should.
Yeah.
I really should.
It's Middle Eastern terrorists in its most racist. There's a lot. This was like
the 80s.
Standard. This was standard operating, procedure in the 80s with terrorists, right?
Did you? It's hard for me to remember. Did you use the Middle Eastern country that DC had created to be fill in for Iran and Iraq at the time?
I might have. I don't remember
because that was a big thing. Yeah.
And I also used Dr. Simpson.
Oh. Okay.
The Asian villain, who was one step up from Egg Foo. Yeah. Come on, you got to give him that. But yeah, so I think it was just somebody took a look at it and went, "Yeah, we'll pass."
Well, I found
a lovely French hardcover that reprinted all that stuff.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's in France, but what the hell? I wrote it. I know what it says.
So were you consulted in any way for the TV show when they did that? No, did anybody wave at you like, hey?
No, I don't pay a lot of attention to that stuff because I don't expect a lot of my stuff to make it in there. I had a few minor characters make it into Supergirl and the Doom Patrol episode. They used my version of the characters in one episode in the first season. And I've turned up in a few thank you sections but it's always for like really minor things, real background things. Like I just noticed that they used my Green Lantern Chip in the Legion of Super Pets.
Oh, really?
He's in that, and apparently I'm in the thank yous, but
But that's it.
Yeah. Well, no. DC is great about that, right, Joe? DC pays when they use our stuff, when they reprint our stuff. It's they signed the contract, they fulfill it. They're great. On that level, but
so the Doom Patrol stuff, it's been reprinted, but yours hasn't, or has it?
No, it has.
It has. Okay.
Yeah, the Bronze Age
the
omnibus,
right? Okay,
was my whole thing, starting with the showcase stuff, but with Joe Staton.
All right, that's right. That was Robot Man in his new form.
That's right, Robot Man in his John Byrne form. Because that was state of the art for robots in those days, right? Everybody was doing the Byrne robot. So, yeah. And who had more right than you? Joe is very taciturn, isn't he?
He's not a VIP, that's why.
But anyway, that was, I love the original Doom Patrol. I thought it was, I think it was the most progressive comic that DC did in the 60s. Yeah. It was Arnold Drake who wrote the thing. He recognized, I think, more than just about any other writer at DC in the mid-'60s that Marvel was going on. And Doom Patrol was very much a Marvel-like book, with the continuity and the characterization and stuff like that. So it was a favorite. I discovered it like about 2 months after it was canceled.
Oh, really?
In the late 60s. That's when I found my first copies in a back issue store, and was able to eventually fill it all in. But yeah, it was a great series. In fact, in 2000-ish, Arnold Drake was up at the office, and I had met him and said hello to him stuff over the years. But this is the first time I had a chance to sit down and talk with the man for a few minutes, and and we eventually got around to Doom Patrol. And I said, a big professional regret is that I messed with your Doom Patrol. I said I should have left it. I should have brought it back the way it was, because you had that nailed, and I didn't. I don't think I caught the right tone or did the right thing at the time. But Arnold's response was, I know.
Yeah.
So
I will say this, though, and being a big Doom Patrol fan of myself, that very first issue of the ongoing series, and I've said this to you before, and the rest of you should know this, and if you haven't read it, you should, being that it ties into everything that had happened before. When Robot Man or Cliff Steele comes out of the surf after looking for Rita Farr's body, and the scene is just complete and utter anguish from a robot that cannot show emotion, and it's brutal. It's unforgettable. It's one of those moments in comics that I'll never forget, and there are so few of those that stick with you time and time again, and that's one of them. So
thank you. Yeah,
I just do appreciate that. I mean, you did a really good job.
It was a. I've only started realizing this, I was like 10, 12 years into my writing career when I got around to doing books like Doom Patrol and Vigilante and such. But those were the comics that kind of, opened me up, freed me or whatever as a writer. Those are the first ones where I really went like, holy crap, I'm actually saying something here. I'm actually, I actually have... Like, I wanted to be I wanted to be in comic books. I wanted to write comic books. I never stopped to think, what do I want to write about? It was just, I came into the 70s, and I want to write superheroes. And, superheroes were still pretty simplistic in the 70s. And, when you wind up writing, like, Superman for Julie Schwartz, Julie had a brilliant career, but at that point in Superman, he was, a little coasty, and the stories were, silly and simple and a little bit absurd, but I just went with it because I'm writing Superman for Julie Schwartz.
Right.
What could be better, But eventually, you keep doing it, and you realize that this stuff is better happen. Or you might as well go and, get a job at a bakery, because I like baked goods. But those are the books that kind of opened me up. Like, I was able to finally get to Doom Patrol and do what I wanted to do. And, so that, finally, I'm free to not have to do these silly ass, Toyman stories and Superman. Terror Man. I did a lot of Terror Man stories. What was up with that?
You look like a cowboy.
It was a cowboy, yeah. Julie liked, I guess Julie liked cowboys.
Well, how many gorilla stories did you do?
I didn't do a lot of gorilla stories, I'm proud to say. I think I've certainly never had a gorilla cover. So.
That's a rarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that had kind of, that had kind of gone by then. There was a theory, if you've heard it, stop me. There was a theory back in the 50s. Actually, it was more than a theory. It was a proven fact that purple gorillas sold. Put a purple gorilla on your cover, and it's sold. There was this big ledger book that I had in my possession for many years when I was on staff at DC from the 50s, and it was, every page was a month, 1952, January, February. There was a thumbnail photograph of the cover pasted up, and underneath were all the sales numbers. Print run, shipped, sell-through, returns, all the numbers. And somebody kept this book up until the early 60s. And it somehow wound up in Schwartz's office. And when Julie was retiring, he was throwing everything out. And there were people sitting, me and Mark Wade, sitting next to the garbage pail going, no, you can't throw that away. I handed most of that stuff to DC's library. I gave that ledger book to the library when I left, always meaning to copy it, to photocopy it, but it was like that thick. And I never got around to it, and I really regret that. Fascinating research material. But anyway, you could look at the pages and go, Purple Gorilla, oh yeah, that bumped 3,000 copies. Or, in those days, probably more like 20,000 copies. Because the numbers were insane. You could, The Adventures of Jerry Lewis were selling 280,000 copies,
That's just insane.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they weren't insane. They were what they should be.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a cheap kids' entertainment, and a lot of cheap kids read them.
Yeah, I know. I was one of them.
Yeah.
Of course, my parents were the ones buying them, but
sure,
and they were really cheap.
Yeah. my father had Lincoln's face impressed in his finger, the penny. Are you kidding me?
So you have a bunch of books.
Well, yes, I do.
Yes.
You said changing topic.
I did. I'm shifting quick here. And of these books, most of them are, not most of them, but some of them are like history books, like just a piece of DC history, actually.
There's one I did recently. It's called Direct Comments, and back in the 80s and 90s, DC had this DC Direct Comments. It was a giveaway through the comic shops, and it was this color comic book size thing. I think it was usually started at 8 pages and grew to like 16. But it was just, it was a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that was handed out to the fans, like Comic Shop News is today. Do they still do that, Comic Shop News?
I don't know. Anybody know if Comic Shop News is still out there?
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this was that, but DC produced it, and, slick color and everything. And I wrote that thing. I wrote a lot of DC's promotional material from the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. If you like that copy on that poster for that Superman toy, I probably wrote it. But anyway, this thing was, news articles and about upcoming features and the listings for the month, and whatever the feature project was that month, we would single out a creator, and I would interview that creator about themselves in the project, and then I'd write a little article, an interview article, with them about it, and run it in the thing. And a few years ago, I discovered I still had the transcripts, the raw, unedited transcripts of like 22 of those interviews. So I, took them out and went through them and edited them into English, because, when you transcribe these things, it's like, I've been doing that lately for my next project, which I'll get to in a moment. And it's like, I can't believe people let me speak in public, But anyway, so I turned these into printed interviews. I heavily footnoted them because the interviews themselves were 40 years old, and most of them, in them, we were talking about things that were 20, 30, and 40 years older than that. It was fun stuff to revisit. And I talked to Denny O'Neil and Murphy Anderson and Jim Aparo, Dick Giordano. There's 24 interviews, including some couple of interviews that were done for other projects but haven't been seen much in the years. But it was a lot of fun. And there's a lot of stuff in there. It's just like nobody makes any deep revelations, or we found out that they were slaughtering kittens. Although I've always been a little suspicious of Sienkiewicz, but that's neither here nor there. I kid. Bill is a pussycat himself. But, because they knew they were talking to me for publication in a DC publication. But it's still interesting to hear these guys talk and to hear their stories kind of, Jim Aparo, who is a fabulous artist, he told me the story how before, he got into the art world, he was doing odd jobs here and there, and he was a machinist for a while, and he clipped the tip of his finger off in a machine. And, everybody who met Jim knew he didn't have one of the fingertips. But he said, like he told the story, and he goes, and I decided I'd better get away from this and get to the art before I lost anything else, But, it's just cool to hear those stories come from these guys, so.
It is a nice look back into what people were saying at the time. And
the projects that were being done.
Exactly.
They talked about, you had Denny O'Neil and Chuck Dixon or whatever talking about the work on Batman and Robin and stuff for those projects. So, I think there's definitely historic value in them.
It's a nice time capsule, really.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, most of these guys have moved on. They're not with us anymore, so it's even more interesting.
And, my follow-up to that is a book of new interviews that I'm currently conducting with my colleagues who I got into the business with in the early and mid-'70s. I'm kind of keeping the table of contents under wraps for a while, but it's like I'm impressed with and flattered by the people who agreed to be interviewed. Well, I will tell you, Joe's interviewed. He was just kind of like, as long as you'll talk to me, I will, Sorry. See, when you came here, you didn't expect I'd be heckling you, did you? No. But I've been talking to a lot of these old friends, and like I was telling John, not a single interview has gone the way I thought it would go. Everybody's like, all right, we'll probably talk about this stuff and that stuff and this and that. No, every interview went off in a completely different direction than I anticipated. And, it's like one guy I was talking to who had been an executive for the company. He was just like telling me these stories. It was like, wow, that's cool. Okay. This went on, the mid-'70s was a very pivotal time, not only for DC, but for comic books in general. It was the older creators, the Bob Kanigers and the Kurt Swans and all these guys who had been doing this stuff for, at that point, 40 years, some of them, gradually the fans were, it started out gradually, but by the mid-'70s, there was a flood of fans coming into the business. So
new blood, so they say. A
lot of new blood. And, it was, hey, that's business, People age out of a business. It eventually happened to me. I aged out, and these damn kids came in and replaced me. But that's what happens. But that was, and again, there were in the early '70s there was serious doubt that comic books would be around much longer. Literally. The conversation in the coffee room at 909 3rd Avenue at DC Comics would be guys, the young guys, Kaluta and Wrightson and Chaikin, coming in, sitting around bullshitting and talking about how, we're at the tail end of comic books. We'll do this for a few years and then go on to lucrative careers in advertising, or whatever. And but they seriously believe that. And, and I was there too, and I was going, I didn't quite buy into that, but I was glad I got in when I did, because maybe they were right. And I've since learned things from, executives who worked, who knew what was going on behind the scenes, that, there really was a danger of comics going away. One guy, his argument is that the comic books that I grew up on, people of my age group did die. They were kids entertainment done for 8 to 12-year-olds that was sold through this method, and had this audience and this and that. And by early 80s, that comic book was dead. That was no longer what comics were. They were an entirely different animal. They were now being distributed through the comic shop, which made them an entirely different kind of merchandise. Instead of being, a casual purchase, they became a deliberate purchase. You had to go seek out comic books, as opposed to when I was a kid, you couldn't go into a candy store, a grocery store, a drugstore, pass a newsstand on the street without having a rack of comics staring in your face. So, see, all the old guys are sitting there going, "Yep, I remember that." Yep. And now it's become this destination item. You have to go seek it out, and it's and the audience is now 30 to 45, and so maybe they were right.
Well, I hope not. I mean, I think we all still like comics. We're all here at Terrificon for that reason.
Yeah. No, I mean, another point is that all of that stuff that happened, the comic shops and this and that, enabled comics to survive long enough to reach this point where we're no longer in danger. Because do you know who the biggest comic book publisher is in the world? Scholastic Books.
Oh, there you go.
They are the biggest comics, graphic novel comics publisher in the world.
They sell.
They are available everywhere.
Yeah,
bookstores, books. Graphic novels have ever-growing shelves in bookstores. Which is a rare category. And of course, comics have taken over the world. we're you can point to things, TV shows, and you say to somebody, "Yeah, that's based on a comic book," and you go, "But nobody's flying." That's right.
Well, anytime a character like Peacemaker makes it to the TV screen and actually, even to the big screen, and then makes it so big, I mean that show
its own dance and everything. No, it's a really good show. I mean, it's a batshit crazy show about batshit crazy people, and one of my favorite genres. They don't have to wear costumes either. I just love batshit movies. Ever see Putney Swope? Oh man, see Putney Swope.
Okay,
it's batshit. You've seen it? Yeah.
Recommendations.
Morton Downey Jr.'s father directed it.
Okay, then I will definitely watch that.
Anyway, so it's been a lot of changes, and but I don't want to. I want to talk to these guys, and literally it is guys because there were. You could count the number of women in comics on one hand.
In the 80s.
There was Ramona Fradon. Who else did we have? Linda Lessman.
I mean, most of the women at Marvel or DC were working behind the scenes more than being in the comics. So.
Yeah. And then Jeanette, who was pretty visible.
Yeah.
But I want to tell these. I want to get these stories on the record before. Too many of my friends have died in the past few years. All of whom I would have. When I was starting to make this list, without even thinking, their names were like right at the top, and it's like, oh shit. I can't talk to Marty Pasco. I can't talk to Len. I want to get these down before I can't talk to this guy, that guy, and the other guy. Joe is immortal. Don't worry about him.
Well, I look forward to it. I mean, the direct comments. That's the
direct conversations.
That's the new one. Okay.
Yeah, direct comments is the first one.
Direct comments is an excellent book. It's something I keep going back to and reading. I really enjoy it. I highly recommend it.
At my table,
and you
by
do.
The way,
Yes.
if anybody's cares.
I do highly recommend it, though. It's really good. So I do look forward to direct conversations.
Yes.
It's kind of like this.
By the end of the year.
Oh, by the end of the year.
Yep.
Oh, very nice.
I got 7 interviews done. 2 or 3 more, and I got my word count, baby.
Beautiful. Other than your table, where can people find your stuff?
Well, it's on Amazon. All these books are available there as ebooks and hard copy. And you can also contact me through Facebook or what's the other way? Instagram. I think I do Instagram.
Ooh, Instagram. I don't do that.
I have an Instagram account. I don't know. I mean, these things are just like, hey, old man, use this. Yes, I have Facebook and Twitter. I mostly use Twitter and Facebook. Yes.
Twitter. Yeah. Everybody's on Twitter.
Sure. Well, a lot of good it does me.
Right.
But
exactly.
You can contact me through them. I have I sell copies, by PayPal through the mail, signed and personalized, or otherwise defaced.
So generally, in comics, you've worked on some pretty major characters over the years. Supergirl being one of them. Are there any characters that you never got a chance to work on that you wanted to?
Just about every Marvel character.
Really?
My whole career, my main comic book writing years were spent at DC Comics. The only work I ever did for Marvel was a bad fill-in Captain America that my brother drew, which made it even better. And one issue of Savage Sword of Conan in the early 90s. And then I wrote for Crazy Magazine. I did their movie parodies and other stuff for a few years for the fabulous and lovely Larry Hama.
Oh, very nice.
And so I never got to write any Marvel characters. Captain America was the one I really wanted to write. He's, after Superman, I think he's probably my favorite. The one chance I got was just like, I was young, I was new. It was a fill-in. You can't do anything in a fill-in. You just have to kind of like, pretend you weren't there. And this story is much better if people would pretend it wasn't there. But other than that, I writing something like the Avengers would have been great. I did kind of touch the Spider-Man, Spider-Man and Hulk in those. I wrote a couple of novels. Pocketbook published this Marvel novel series in the late 70s, and I wrote a couple of those. Len Wein and Marv Wolfman were editing those. Packaging, yeah.
Back in the day when you could read books.
Yes, well, I still can.
Yeah. I suppose we could take some questions.
Yes.
I mean, if anyone has any questions for Paul, anybody? Because I got a ton of them.
Fight it out.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Arian.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Don't really have a specific question. I don't know if you could just talk a little bit about creating it.
Well, Arian was just kind of, whatever. I forget what feature. There was a backup feature in Warlord that had graduated to its own title, and the editor was Laurie Sutton. And she said, she was looking for a new backup feature. So I just kind of went home and ripped off Larry Niven's When the Magic Goes Away and came up with Arian. It was, I wanted to do a sword and sorcery fantasy thing. I liked the whole Atlantis thing. That's a cool thing to work from. It's a known quantity, but nobody knows what it really is. So make it your own. Plus, it could eventually tie in with the DCU through Aquaman. And again, I just like the concept of the magic disappearing. People who a race that's lived for millennia. Millennia.
You got it.
Yeah. Lived for thousands and thousands of years. Dependent on magic, and suddenly, poof, it's gone, or is fading away. I just thought that was an interesting concept. And again, Larry Niven did write this wonderful fantasy novel called When the Magic Goes Away, which ironically I wound up adapting for DC's graphic novel series in the 80s, later 80s, with Jan Duursema, who was the Arion artist. So I actually got to adapt the thing I plagiarized.
That's really funny, actually.
Yeah. And the proper use of ironic.
And I have it.
Yeah.
And I don't remember that you wrote that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I keep thinking Larry Niven, and it's Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex.
Yes.
That lovely thing, but which I think was adapted too into graphic novel form.
Oh, probably somebody did.
Somebody did it.
I don't think it was one of DC's.
Yeah. Anyway.
Can you imagine Julie Schwartz editing that? What the hell is this? What makes you think you can draw Lois's orgasm? What?
Oh boy.
So yeah, it was. It was a very. It was a personal series to me. It was when I look back at it years later. I saw that a lot of my own personal stuff was actually, that I was going through at the time was appearing in those stories. The kind of ups and downs in relationships and things. So it was interesting. The first time I ever noticed that that I put myself into anything. And it was also, it was, by a weird fluke, I got to be, I got Joe Kubert to be my editor for like 6 or 8 or 10 months of the run.
Oh, yeah?
So, I got the only chance I got to work with Joe Kubert, and, anybody can learn storytelling from Joe Kubert, The first thing he said to me when he took over, I had been booted off the book by the previous editor who wanted Doug Munch to write it. So, when the guy who booted me off got canned, Joe was handed it to edit, and he called me up, and the first thing he said is, "Why aren't you writing the book you created?" And I said, "Go ask." It was Ernie Colan. He was an idiot. He didn't know what he was doing as an editor. So Joe said, "Well, you're back on it. You're late. Get me a plot." Anyway, I started working on it again. And after a couple of issues, Joe calls me. He goes, "It's good. It's fine. I like direction." He said, "But there's too much magic in this thing." And I said, "Well, Joe, it's a book about a magician." And he goes, "Yeah, I know." He says, "But it's too much magic. Let's take away his power. Get rid of the magic for a while." Okay, it's like I don't really want to do that, but okay, you're Joe Kubert. I will listen to you. Besides, if even if I didn't respect you enough to listen to you just for that reason, you're big enough to crush my head in your bare hands. Anyway, I did as he requested, and after an issue or two, I realized, well, of course, he didn't say get rid of the magic. Yes, stop writing so you'll learn how to write the character so he's not dependent on the magic for everything. I was using it as a get out of jail free card. It's like, poof, we're okay. It's kind of like an episode of Supergirl. So he was right, of course, because he's Joe fucking Kubert. And Checkmate was just, Vigilante got canceled. Holy crap, I need a book to replace it on the schedule. Nobody had an opening, so, make your own. I did. I came up with the concept, used a few characters from Vigilante. John Byrne came in. He just designed the costume, and it was more to use his name for publicity value than, he wasn't really involved in the book at all. He probably never read it. And it just, it worked out. I think it came together nicely. Steve Irwin was the artist, and Steve just did some beautiful stuff. That first issue, the opening sequence takes place on the floor of and then outside of the Chicago Stock Exchange. Steve just drew it. Every detail, every bit of wooden paneling, and it was just this is the guy, So it just worked out and progressed well for a while. And then, like most things, especially in that cycle of comics in the late 80s and early 90s, I think the fact that we got like 3 years out of it, it wasn't a bad run, all things considered.
What was nice about Checkmate at the time, too, the way the espionage books that were being published, that you had Suicide Squad, Checkmate, and I know there was another one, maybe even Captain Atom, the way it was all mixed in together. Yeah. It was almost like a sub-universe within the DC universe, and it's a lot of fun to go back and read these things that I didn't necessarily pick up at the time. I was a huge Squad fan, and I picked up some of the Checkmate stuff, but I don't know about you guys, but trying to find those issues now in those back issue bins, for Checkmate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm having a real hard time finding them where, years ago they were easy to find.
Yeah, no, I've never heard anybody speak of their scarcity.
I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
James Gunn, and I became Twitter buddies, and he posted something, about, well, I'm done, Peacemaker is wrapped up. What should my next project be? And I, sent him an all caps reply, Checkmate. I mean, and I think Arion too, frankly, you can Game of Thrones that thing and have, something to work with. So
there's plenty there to strip mine if they wanted to. I mean, be interesting.
Yeah. Be profitable. And interesting.
One would hope
that would be interesting. Oh, you mean you finally made money in comic books? That's interesting. Yeah.
Sure. It happens occasionally.
Occasionally. Yeah.
So
No, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I actually have 3 quick questions to be fairly easy.
I have this long, so yeah.
The first one, in the Peacemaker TV series that recently came out, I believe they had a streak or a character that was your brother's name.
Yes.
Never find out. Was that a mistake?
I am sure it was. I never was. I never asked, but I am sure that some, James Gunn said, "Hey, make sure you get Kupperberg's name in there," and somebody, yeah. So, but my response was, what it has been my whole life, There he goes again, He dislocated his shoulder at my wedding. So, needless to say, it was always all about Alan. Yeah.
My second question is, were you aware that Orion was recently in the new Jon Johnson season? They used that character.
Yes, I am aware of that. I have, yeah, it's cool. And they've got modern versions of the rest of the cast as well. Okay. So these are like descendants or whatever. So there's a Wind and a Shan and all the other characters. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. I love that stuff. I love seeing them pop up.
I love seeing your stuff that's coming back to those, that's very exciting.
It would be exciting. I mean, they would never let me write it, but it would be, you're old, you can't write comic books. No, you don't understand how experience works. So.
And my last question, Paul, was, you were saying earlier how some of your simpler writing in the earlier days of comics versus the more emotional human aspect type writing.
Right.
Did you see a difference in people's response to that? Like, of course, were a lot more people buying that more emotional thing, or did it not make a difference, or did it depend on the storyline?
You really can't go by numbers because, comic books were in 1992, I think it was, 91, when I went on staff at DC, I was handed Dark Stars to edit.
Ooh. And
I was told at the time that I should try to do something with it because we were, it was falling towards 65,000, and that was El Morte. Who would not sell their foreskin for 65,000 sales these days in this market?
Exactly. It's crazy.
So, yeah. So numbers, back then, but, 20 years later, a friend of mine was doing an independent book for Dark Horse, and he calls me. He's stunned because he just got a call from Dark Horse saying the numbers on the first issue were 12,000, and they were ecstatic about that. And it was like, he was a guy who was used to the old days, the 100,000 plus, but 12,000 in this market, in that market at the time, that was great. So I don't know, but I know I see more people come to me with that later stuff for signing, and more people talk to me about that stuff than they do about my, my House of Mystery intros. Although Chaikin drew one of those, so. It was,
Yeah. There's something to shake in his face.
But yeah, so it's just it was still, we were still kind of growing up. We were still trying to grow up at that point. There were a lot of guys doing, but even like man, you look at like what Steve Gerber was doing. Everybody was talking about it. Was so this and it was interesting and it was different. It was weird, but it was still kind of like kid stuff. Steve Englehart, he was doing stuff like when you read, like Harlan Ellison. I always think of Harlan Ellison, like when I read him in high school and college, I thought he was brilliant. And then when I look back at him and reread him as an adult, I see he's just, he's just a big mouth and a clever turn of phrase. He's a good writer, and he sells his stories, but, so you kind of have to learn to look through, that stuff. You have to see through but what stuff you read as a kid, like somebody said to me, I wish I could get as excited, about new stuff as I could, stuff I read as a kid. And I go, well, if you're an adult who gets as excited about a comic book as you did when you were 12 years old, you should seek help. We're not meant, I didn't grow up in a world where I was meant to still be reading comic books at this age. And, again, if you look at the early 1960s, the DC 80-page Giants, the annuals, best comic books ever published. Quarter, big 80 pages of comics, they were all reprints, but it didn't matter because, I was 6, 7, 8 years old. They were new to me, But the theory they operated on with those books, if you look at them, most of the reprints weren't more than 4, 5, 6 years old. Because, the theory was if you're buying it today, you weren't reading it back then. And if you were reading it back then, you're not still buying it today. Plus, I think a lot of it was also just plain, logistics. I don't think they didn't have plates or stats or copies of the stories. They didn't have film. Until film came into use, they used to print off of metal plates. So those plates would get engraved, and when they were done printing, they would get melted down and used again. So, like all that, the reason there were so few Golden Age stories printed was because they just didn't have it. They didn't have the, black and white copies to redo them. Years later, they came up with procedures and processes to bleach the story, the color out of the books and publish them. But yeah, so, it was just a whole different world. It was just, I was supposed to, grow up and move on to, I was an English literature major in college, minoring in education, and turned out I was minoring in education my whole life. But thank God I got into comics, because otherwise I'd, have to have been a teacher, and it would have been horrible for the kids. Wouldn't have been so good for me either. But, it was just, I was 19. I started submitting stuff to publishers, and guy at Charlton bought my stories.
Who bought it?
Nick Cuddy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I got to work with Nick years later when he was on staff at DC. Good guy. So, all these, but again, going back to the, comics are dying, I half believed I would be, I'd be doing something else by the time I was, 30. But again, fortunately, not so much.
Do you think more people know who you are now than they did 30 years ago?
I guess so, because of the internet. I mean, I've been doing, I've been doing conventions. My first convention was 1971, Phil Seuling's New York Comic Con, and in 1972, Levitz and I were doing the program book for them. So I've been going to these things a long time, and at the time, as a fan, I was I was a BNF, a big name fan. We used to have acronyms. It's like, my favorite was Gaffiate, which stood for Get Away From It All, when you would stop reading comics for a while, because it was just too intense. But we had a whole sublingo in those days. But anyway, so and then I'd been and I got to write. I wrote Superman in the '80s, which was not what it had been and would become again, but was still a fairly low profile character. But I think today,
Well, I would think that, and just as the program booklet says, being a renaissance of Paul Kupperberg, I mean, it seems like that. Rediscovery. Right? Okay, so, but I mean, honestly, with I think just with Peacemaker alone, and the attachment it seems that you have with the character, and the popularity of Peacemaker alone, I mean, more and more people are going, oh, hey, he's still here.
Cool. It's good.
I feel that way. I don't know about you guys. But
I'm happy to be rediscovered.
Yeah. No. Keep putting out those books.
Beats the alternative. Oh, haven't you heard? Oh.
Well, hopefully one of these days we'll see that Charlton movie too. So.
Hey, they feel as bad as everybody else.
I know.
It's just anybody got $250,000 for post production.
Yeah, if anyone wins that lottery tonight, the Charlton movie would like to get completed.
Just like $250,000 for post production,
and it would be awesome.
It would be. I've seen some of the footage.
Yeah.
So
it would be very awesome. Very good.
Anyway,
where are we at here? Oh, got about 10 minutes left. Anybody else have questions? Anyone? Okay, I guess we can
wrap.
You want to? Paul says goodbye.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Maisie Richardson-Sellers, and you are watching Fandom Spotlight. Be a legend and hit that like button, and most importantly, have fun and follow your fandom.